look, I don't want to ask you the crystal ball question. I want to save that for when you and I are in Vegas together in a few years. But what I do want to get a sense from you is what do you think Bitcoin and Bitcoiners in particular need to do to help other countries get onboarded in the way El Salvador has onboarded onto a Bitcoin standard?
I see evidence of this happening already all around the world. You know what happened in El Salvador started with Bitcoin Beach, right? El Zante. Like it just literally started in this tiny little community where a couple Bitcoiners were like, "Hey, let's do this. Let's create a little circular economy using just Bitcoin. We think it will help the community. It's a dirt poor community. They're really nice people. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could help them out and see what Bitcoin can do?" They did it, and then years later, look what happened. El Salvador now has a president who's shilling Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin, putting it on their balance sheet, and making fun of the U.S. dollar, and getting attacked by United States politicians and international politicians because of it. That's pretty astonishing. I see these kind of communities happening all around the world, which is awesome. They're in Africa, they're in other parts of South America and Central America as well. And you don't see them as much in countries like the U.S., where we have a really sound financial system, and the dollar is actually a pretty good currency as far as currencies go. Even though it's the nicest looking crack house on the crack street, as Greg Foss likes to say, and I like that analogy. So we won't see it as much here, and it's a little harder to implement little communities like that here, but you could do it. We could create little circular economies in the US, and they are kind of starting to sprout up. So I just think that's how it is. That's what's so beautiful about Bitcoin. We've reached peak centralization. We've reached peak nationalism in countries that have these huge, massive monopolies on power, and they literally can destroy the world, 10 times over if they wanted to. If they wanted to start a nuclear war and do it, they could. That's ridiculous. And so nothing is better or makes me happier from a human point of view that we've reached, I think, peak centralization, and now we're starting to decentralize. The internet made this much easier, and now Bitcoin being magic internet money is making it even much easier. To your point, Q, of the separation of church and state, I think we're living in it. It's hard to see it in real time, like you don't see it happening, but at the same time, if you look closely and you can take a step back, that's one of the things I'm good at, by the way. I'm kind of a top-down macro thinker. Like I kind of see the big picture happening. I'm not as good at the little details, but when you take a step back and look, you can see all of this happening kind of right under everybody's noses. We saw internetization happening in the 90s and early 2000s, where most people didn't believe that it would, that much would happen, and then suddenly everybody got Amazon, right? All the brick and mortar retailers just got pummeled, and then the blockbusters went out of business because up came Netflix and things like that. Like that's exactly what's starting to happen in the Bitcoin world too. One by one, we'll just see dominoes fall. Everybody who makes fun of Bitcoin and doesn't believe it and doesn't want anything to do with it, they're literally just going to get run over, and they're actually going to get put out of existence by Bitcoin at some point. And then 10 years from now we'll be like, I can't believe you didn't see that coming. Like, could it was so obvious. Why didn't you see, why didn't you see the internet coming in 2000 and put all your money in Amazon and Netflix and Google, and it's like, well, it wasn't that obvious though for most people. Most people didn't really believe it was going to have the dramatic impact or as quickly as it did. So I see the same thing happening with Bitcoin. It's a beautiful ground up organic type growth. It doesn't come from the state. That's what makes it awesome. And the state will fight against it because it is, as you say, the separation of money and state. And then even as it's happening, by the way, since we're one day away from voting, you all should vote. That's great. You're Americans. Take advantage of that. But if you really want to be effective in politics, buy Bitcoin. I'm telling you, you will defund politicians, you will defund the state, and we will, as we move into this more decentralized world, you're literally making the dollar weaker, and you're making politicians weaker, and you're increasing the whole Bitcoin standard, and you're hastening the rise of the Bitcoin standard and the new Bitcoin standard world, which that's something I'm shooting for. So that's how I try to vote. I vote with my dollars getting exchanged into Bitcoin.